Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin Saturday. Welcome. Two great guests, Charles Payne, and I want to introduce you to Ali Murray, where we're going to be talking about education in a very deep way. But before we get there, there's a lot of talk about affordability. After the election, most of the analysts and commentators were saying it was about affordability. Mandami was right. It's about affordability. Our polls show it's right. It's about affordability. And I contend it's about a lot more than affordability. That may be an issue, no question, but it's a lot more. Demographics, immigration, get out the vote campaigns, the quality of the candidates. But I want to take you through a couple of states here. Affordability. Because it's amazing to me that blue state governors and mayors are able to talk about affordability. It's amazing to me that the national Democrats in Congress are now talking about affordability. And that the Republicans are failing on this front. How are we failing? By talking about it? No. We're not talking about what's going on in red states versus blue states. That red states are far more affordable to everybody in the red state than the blue states, particularly for young people. Because you're about to find out that young people, by number, more of them live in red states than blue states. So I'm going to go through this. I think you're going to find it very interesting. But I'm hoping Republicans, whether they're elected or unelected leaders, will pay attention to this and understand how to explain it, because what you're listening to are the media and the media spin on the East Coast and the West Coast, and you're missing the real story, which is if the battle is over affordability, you should be cleaning their clocks. Let's take a look. I decided to pick a few states. Let's look at Florida versus New York. Does that sound like a good idea? Florida has about 4 million more people, and their state budget is half the size of New York's. Is Florida more affordable than New York in most instances? You better believe it. First of all, they don't have an income tax. New York has never met a tax it didn't like. They tax things that are alive, dead, moving, not moving. They don't care. So this information is from My Life Elsewhere. And they've gathered an enormous amount of information, and I want to share it to you. New York versus Florida. The cost of living is 16.5% for the average person more in New York than Florida. That is a lot of money. 8.7% more in New York for groceries than in Florida. 22.9% more for transportation in New York than Florida. How about childcare? 60% more for childcare in New York than Florida. Clothing, 2.6% more for clothing in New York than Florida. How about New Jersey? I'm picking these three states where they just had elections, blue states effectively. The overall cost of living in New Jersey is 24.8% higher than in Florida. What are we talking about? Restaurants, 0.7%, so about even when it comes to restaurants. How about groceries? Food. 16.9% more in New Jersey. How about transportation? 29.6% more for transportation in New Jersey. Housing, 2.7% more in New Jersey than Florida. Childcare, 78.7% more in New Jersey than Florida. Clothing, 18.9% more for clothing in New Jersey than Florida. Affordability, anybody? I'm not done. Let's compare Florida and Virginia. 13.9% overall cost of living higher in Virginia than Florida. And remember, Florida is no income tax either. And I'm not even including that. We're talking about goods and services here. All right, restaurants. It's 0.4% more for restaurants in Virginia than Florida, so that's even. What else? 13% more for groceries in Virginia than Florida. 8.1% more for transportation in Virginia than Florida. Now, for housing, it's 7.3% less in Virginia than Florida. You got a boom going on in Florida, but just laying it out. What about childcare? 65.7% more for childcare in Virginia than Florida. What about clothing? 5% more in Virginia than Florida. And I said, let's throw in California. After all, Newsom wants to be president of the United States. How are they doing over there? Let's take a look. Florida versus California. 21.8%, the cost of living is higher in California for the same goods. You're paying 21.8% more than in Florida. 6.2% more for restaurants in California than Florida, 9.2% more for groceries in California than Florida, 20.6% more for transportation in California than in Florida, 16% more for housing in California than in Florida, a whopping 65.5% more for childcare in California than in Florida, 5.7% more for clothing. Very expensive state, very. Affordability, anybody? Republicans. As I went through this data, and I can't share it all in the time that I have, virtually every Republican state, virtually every one, the costs are lower than virtually every Democrat state. So affordability, if that's the main issue, then use it. I'm not done. Let's take a look at Texas, another big Republican state versus New York. Overall cost of living is higher in New York by 17.9%, 2.6% more for restaurants in New York than Texas, 23.7% more for groceries in New York than in Texas, 20.3% more for transportation in New York than in Texas, 12.8% more for housing in New York than in Texas, 37.8% more for childcare in New York than in Texas, 2.9% less for clothing. You're going to see this through a number of states. I guess it's because New York is a clothing capital, but it's very close. How about New Jersey and Texas? Oh, don't get me started. 26.3% cost of living in New Jersey is higher than in Texas. 7.2% more for restaurants in New Jersey than Texas. 33% more for groceries in New Jersey than in Texas. I mean, this is typical. I'm just telling you, this is what we're going through here. 26.5% more for transportation in New Jersey than in Texas. 23.5% more for housing in New Jersey than in Texas. What else? 53.5% more for childcare in New Jersey than Texas. And the beat goes on. 13.4% more for clothing in New Jersey than Texas. What about Virginia and Texas? Okay, 15.9% overall cost of living is higher, 9.1% more for restaurants, 28.6% more for groceries in Virginia than Texas, 6.7% more for transportation in Virginia than Texas, 8.5% more for housing, 44.3% more for childcare, 0.2% more for clothing in Virginia than Texas. What about Texas and California? The cost of living overall in California is 24.5% higher in California than Texas. I find this unbelievable that Republicans are allowing the Democrats, the Marxists, the socialists to run away on this affordability issue. Hopefully this is a wake-up call. 13.1% more for restaurants in California than Texas, 24.4% more for groceries in California than Texas, 19.6% more for transportation in California, 38.3% more for housing, 44.8% more for childcare in California than Texas, 0.8% more for clothing. That's a wash. You can see where you choose to live makes a huge difference on affordability. Let's pick a couple more here. What do you say? Let's do Tennessee, the volunteer state, another no-tax state. So Florida, no income tax, Texas, no income tax, Tennessee, no income tax. Don't worry. I'll pick one where there's an income tax, Ohio, in a minute. But let's just pick Tennessee. Overall versus New York, the cost of living in New York is 19.4% higher. Now, Florida, Texas, Tennessee are seeing booms. Incoming populations that affect the housing and prices, and yet the prices are still below New York, below New Jersey, below Virginia, below California. All right, let's talk about restaurants. 0.2% less in Tennessee, so that's a wash. 15.5% more for groceries in New York versus Tennessee. 42.2% more for transportation in New York than Tennessee. 8.2% more for housing. 43% more for child care in New York than Tennessee. 6.2% less for clothing in New York. Again, I think that's because New York is such a clothing hub, but it doesn't matter. The overall expense in New York, cost of living, is almost 20% higher than Tennessee. Tennessee, which is booming. How about Tennessee and New Jersey? Overall cost of living, 28.1% higher in New Jersey than Tennessee. 4.2% more for restaurants in New Jersey, 24.5% more for groceries in New Jersey, 52.2% more for transportation in New Jersey, 18.5% more for housing in New Jersey than Tennessee, 59.7% more for childcare, 8.5% more for clothing in New Jersey than Tennessee. Wow. That's why people are moving to these red states. Affordability. How about Virginia and Tennessee? 16.2% more expensive cost of living in Virginia than Tennessee. 4% more for restaurants. Let's look here. 20.4% more groceries in Virginia than in Tennessee. 24.8% more for transportation. 4.3% more for housing. 47.6% more for childcare. 3.9% less for clothing. Overall, Tennessee versus California. California's 24.5% cost of living higher than Tennessee. 9.9% more for restaurants. 32.1% more for housing. 47.3%. Is this boring? No. This is unbelievable that Republicans aren't using this. You got a Marxist in New York City where the costs are through the roof, where everything's gone up. Since Giuliani's gone and Bloomberg's gone, it's crazy. And he's running on affordability when the Democrats did it. In New Jersey, the Democrats won re-election, where they're the ones who drove up the property taxes and the electricity bills and the food bills. We have to learn how to speak and make the case and market conservatism and private property rights and capitalism. Not the gloom and doom welfare states of these blue states, and now a pink city, that would be New York City. Let's go on. 32.1% more for housing in California than Tennessee. 47.3% more for childcare. 3.2% less for clothing. It's a big gap, though, overall. One more state. Let's pick Ohio. They've got real cities in Ohio. They have them in Texas. They have them in Florida. Let's pick some. Overall, New York versus Ohio, cost of living. New York is 25.7% higher cost of living than Ohio. 13% more for restaurants. 26.5% more for groceries. That's a lot. 10.9% more for transportation. 36% more for housing. 43.2% more for childcare in New York than in Ohio. What about Ohio versus New Jersey? Again, I'm picking those three states plus California that were just up in Tuesday. Because it's affordability. That's the question. Okay, so why aren't we winning on affordability? The candidates, the messaging, plus it's more than just affordability. Wow, Ohio versus New Jersey overall, 35.1% the cost of living is higher in New Jersey than Ohio. Restaurants, again, 18% more in New Jersey. 36% more on groceries in New Jersey. 36% more than Ohio. 15.6% more on transportation in New Jersey than Ohio. Let's keep going. How about 51.5% housing more expensive in New Jersey than Ohio? 59.5% more expensive childcare in New Jersey than in Ohio. 28.9% more for clothing in New Jersey than Ohio. And then we have Ohio versus Virginia. 23.3% overall. Virginia cost of living is higher. 17.8% for restaurants. 30.5% for groceries. 2.1% for transportation. 30.4% more for housing in Virginia than Ohio, 50% more for childcare in Virginia, 13.8% more for clothing, and then finally, Ohio versus California. Overall, 34% higher cost of living in California than Ohio, 24.5% on restaurants, 27.9% on groceries, 11.9% on transportation, 67.5% on housing, 50.7% on childcare, 14.5% on clothing. All right, by now, the last 10 minutes, you get the point. But every state goes this way. It's just incredible. Now, what about the youth? Are they doing better in Democrat states or Republican states? This one's going to, I think, shock you. Here we are. Where are most young adults living with their parents? Number 1, Hawaii, Democrat. Number 2, California, Democrat. Number 3, New Jersey, Democrat. Number 4, New York, Democrat. Number 5, New Hampshire, Democrat. The lowest percentage of young adults living with their parents. Number 1, North Dakota, Republican. Number 2, South Dakota, Republican. Number 3, Iowa, Republican. Number 4, Nebraska, Republican. Number 5, Kansas, Republican. These are healthy states. States with the most children living at home. That is the number of children living at home, not just households with children living at home. New Jersey, the highest. Connecticut, and Democrat. Connecticut, 2nd, Democrat. California, 3rd, Democrat. Maryland, 4th, Democrat. New Hampshire, 5th, Democrat. Delaware, 6th, Democrat. New York, 7th, Democrat. Hawaii, 8th, Democrat. Mississippi, 9th, Republican. And Florida, 10th, Republican. What about the median age? Where's the youngest population, the youngest demographic? What states, where are they? You ready for this one? The youngest population. Number 1, Utah. Number 2, D.C. Number 3, Texas. Number 4, Alaska. Number 5, North Dakota. Number 6, Nebraska. Number 7, Oklahoma. Number 8, Idaho. Number 9, California. Number 10, Kansas. In other words, 8 of the top 10 states with the youngest population, the most youth, are Republican. Republican. Most of the affordable states are Republican. Republican. What about the oldest states? Maine, Democrat. New Hampshire, Democrat. Vermont, Bernie, Democrat. West Virginia, Republican. Florida, Republican. Delaware, Democrat. Connecticut, Democrat. Pennsylvania, mostly Democrat, but not exclusively. Rhode Island, Democrat. New Jersey, Democrat. The vast majority of the states with the oldest population are Democrat. So I thought I'd go through these numbers for you because I think they're fascinating. Where are most young people living at home? Almost exclusively Democrat states. Almost, not completely, but the largest number of young people living in homes, at home with parents, Democrat. And the number of homes with the most youth living in them, Democrat. The most expensive states, compared to Republican states, even big Republican states, Democrat. So you have the youth, Republican states, more affordability, Republican states, lower taxes, Republican states. Now, the pollsters come out and they do these nationwide reviews. Young people are upset. Young people can't afford things. So we talk about theory. We talk about ideology. We talk in generalities. I'm breaking it down, and we could do this for hours, but, I do want to keep my audience, you, state by state by state, with even the big Republican states, with big cities, and hands down, the Republicans have the message on affordability for youth in the states. They're healthier in terms of how they're run. The taxes are lower. Make your case, Republicans. This should be hands down. I'll be right back.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.